When I left CES in Vegas in January this year, the Aqara U300 lock was on the top of my list of products I was most excited about. It's a smart lock that replaces a doorknob instead of the typical ones that replace a deadbolt. It supports Matter over Thread, and it works with Apple's Home Key, which means you can tap your iPhone or Apple Watch to quickly get inside. But now that it's finally here and shipping, and I've had a few days to play with it, does it live up to the hype and my anticipation? If you're new here, I'm Eric Welander. I've been an app developer on Apple platforms since 2011 and building out my smart home here on YouTube since 2018. So if you're into Apple or smart home tech, consider subscribing. And thanks to Aqara for sending me this lock for review before the release date, free of charge. And while Aqara has and will sponsor other videos on my channel, this video is not sponsored. And I'm going to break this review into three sections. First, let's talk about the hardware, which is pretty amazing with this lock. Then we'll talk about the software, and then one more thing that kind of bugs me, but could be a really cool feature for you. Now, Aqara is working in some difficult constraints to make this lock possible. To have a keypad, NFC, Thread, and Bluetooth smart home connections, along with a door handle and a fingerprint reader, it's a tricky weight and balance situation to get all that inside of a door handle that grips to your door. Now, that said, I think that they've nailed the look and feel of this hardware. The handle feels really nice on both sides. It just has this nice rounded modern aesthetic, and turning the handle also feels great. The fingerprint reader on the outside is in a great place to put your thumb as you grip the handle. And then you can pop off the fingerprint reader, which is still attached by a wire, and it reveals a spot for a keyhole to use a traditional old-fashioned key. Now, installation of this lock was pretty straightforward. It's very similar to a deadbolt smart lock in terms of the types of screws and things you have to deal with if you've done one of those before. Just keep in mind that if you're installing a lock, this one or something else, just plan a little bit of extra time around the installation. It's not the kind of smart home gadget you can just leave half finished for a long time. You probably need to have your door closing and locking at some point. Now, like I think pretty much all locks I've tried, this uses a set of screws going through the hole in the door to grip onto the door. And it seems like it got a little bit loose after the first day I put it on the door. And then I took some of the lock back apart to tighten the screws in the middle to hold it tighter to the door. And when I did that, it seemed to have messed up something else and made it tighter, and then I was getting door jam errors both from the Aqara app as well as the Apple Home app. But I was then able to just loosen it a little bit, and everything's been fine since. But just pay attention to the right amount of pressure and grip as you get this lock on your door. And for what it's worth, we have had issues on this specific door getting our old non-smart doorknob to do the same thing and stick to the door. So it might be a little bit more just my specific problems than something you would face. Now, one detail of the hardware that might encourage this kind of behavior of moving the door lock quickly and hard is that the handle still moves when the door is locked. So on the outside, you can feel it being a little bit lighter in resistance because it's not actually going to turn the latch, but that's only a slight difference. A lot of doorknobs that lock don't even turn at all when the lock is in place, and that means that this just takes kind of a split second longer to figure out, is the door locked when you put your hand on it, where if the handle didn't move at all, it'd be really obvious right away. Now, we'll talk more about the outside of the lock in a minute, but moving to the inside, it's pretty minimal and nondescript. There's a button on the top, and when the lock is unlocked and you hit this button, it will lock it. So nice way you can quickly lock the door from the inside. And then if the door is locked, this button can enable passage mode. And we'll talk more about passage mode in a minute, but you have to do that and then open the door and use your admin fingerprint or PIN code to actually trigger passage mode. And then there's a small gap at the bottom to lift up the panel that you put on during installation. And under there, you'll find the AA batteries powering the lock, as well as some buttons for troubleshooting. And while there are a decent number of parts of this lock that are plastic, whatever kind of finish Aqara used on the plastic makes it look really good. You'd have to maybe be a materials expert or look really closely to realize it's plastic, and would probably fit in just fine in a much nicer home or hallway than where I have it right going to my garage. Now moving to the outside of the door, there's a keypad that you can use to enter lock codes, and once you set this up with Apple's HomeKey, you can actually assign those codes inside there, and the beauty of HomeKey is that then those lock pin codes work across all your HomeKey locks in your home. Going to the handle, as we talked about earlier, there's the fingerprint reader, and the fingerprints need to be added inside of the Aqara app, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the software section. And right under the keypad or somewhere around there is the NFC reader. So you can tap your iPhone or Apple Watch with compatible NFC radios or one of Aqara's little NFC tags to then open the door. When I first took this lock out of the box, I did something the instructions don't really tell you to do, but that's that I added it to the software side of my smart home with the Aqara app first, before actually installing the lock. That way I was sure that everything with the details of the software worked out before I took down my existing lock and installed this new one. Sometimes with smart locks, there's some kind of a calibration mode you need to do during setup, especially with deadbolts, so this doesn't always work, but in this case, it worked fine for me and might be something you want to try too. You can have this lock set up in two different modes. One is Bluetooth mode, or basically without an Aqara M3 hub, and the other mode this lock can run in is with the Aqara M3 hub connecting to the lock and then bridging that into your smart home system of choice. Aqara is moving a lot of their devices to Thread, and the M3 hub is their latest hub that also supports Thread. So I get where they're coming from with this. They already did this same strategy with the U200 lock, but of course it's a bummer if you already have another Aqara hub, you can't use it with this lock. So let's hope that Aqara keeps the M3 hub as their one true hub for years and years and years to come, following companies like Philips Hue and Lutron, who haven't forced you to buy a new hub in practically a century. The killer feature to me that the M3 hub adds is the ability to use Aqara's $10 little NFC cards to unlock Aqara locks. So you'll need the M3 hub to get that to work with the U300. This can be nice if you have someone who comes to your home who doesn't have an Apple device to use something like HomeKey, and yes, they could use a PIN code or a physical key, but just having this little NFC tag they can put on a keychain and tap on the door is really convenient. Now, of course, if you already have an M3 hub like I do, because Aqara sent me one earlier this year for review, then you can just set it up with the M3 hub right away. I ended up wanting to test it as well at first with the Bluetooth mode. And Aqara in their setup process in the app doesn't really make this obvious, but it is possible to just add this lock straight into Apple Home. You'll want to have the Aqara app on your phone and use it to connect with Bluetooth to the lock to configure things like your initial admin user with the admin passcode and fingerprint, as well as maybe some other settings you want to adjust in the future and installing things like software updates. But otherwise, the Matter code just lets it go straight into Apple HomeKit. Now, all of my testing of HomeKey has been while it's paired with the M3 hub that I also have in my home. And while I love that Aqara doesn't require an M3 hub for this to work with Matter ecosystems like Apple Home, I generally like to follow the main path that the manufacturer wants you to use, because that's usually what gets the most attention and the most bug fixes. So if you want to get this lock, it's probably a good idea to have an M3 hub. There are other benefits to that as well, but I'll be going a little more in depth on the technical details of this, as well as whether you should add an M3 hub or not to your smart home and some edge cases there in my next live stream. And I'll leave a link to that in the description below, whether it's already happened or going to happen. Tune in more if you're interested in more details about this whole setup. Now, using the lock with HomeKey, once you get it set up, is really just like any other HomeKey lock. You can tap your iPhone or Apple Watch to be let in, and it's the same for anyone else who's been added to your Apple Home as a user or with iOS 18 as a guest, although I haven't tested that part myself yet. And as I mentioned, it's great that it works seamlessly across multiple home key doors in your home. So maybe you have this lock from Aqara and a lock from someone else on another door. As long as they both support home key, all of these features are seamless across those locks. This gets me to the biggest software feature of the U300, which is kind of my one more thing, which can drive you crazy or be the best thing you've ever wanted in a smart lock. If you think about it, a deadbolt lock, which is pretty common in smart locks, it cannot lock if the door is open, because that means that the deadbolt goes out of the door and then you can't shut the door. But because the U300 is a latch lock and doesn't use a deadbolt mechanism, it can lock right away after you unlock it and open the door. And so that's what Aqara has done with the lock out of the box. If you unlock this lock and you open the door, it will, boom, right away lock again. So when you shut it, the door is locked. And if you are someone who forgets to lock your door, or it's a door where you want to be sure that it's always locked, this could be a really great feature. But on the other hand, if you like to have your door unlocked for extended periods of time, it can be really annoying. Now, Aqara has addressed this in one way with something they call passage mode. Now, passage mode can only be enabled on the lock by pressing the top button and then opening the door and using your admin fingerprint or PIN code to then enable passage mode. And that means that then the lock will stay unlocked. Now, by default, it will indefinitely stay unlocked in passage mode, but you can also in Aqara's settings change it to only be, let's say, a certain number of hours until it will auto lock again. But if you have passage mode active, and anything locks the lock, let's say you have an Apple Home scene you trigger or an automation that triggers the lock to lock, then passage mode is over. And so then it goes back to auto locking and you unlock it and it will auto lock again. And you cannot re-enable passage mode unless an Aqara admin user for your lock is physically there to hit the button and re-enable passage mode. There's no way to do that remotely with, let's say, Apple Home or even an Aqara automation that I can find to re-enable passage mode. So it makes the setup that I want kind of convoluted and not possible, because what I want is for this lock to lock at night or when we're away from home and trigger all of that via Apple Home. And then otherwise, if we're at home during the day, I want this lock to remain unlocked all the time for easy access in and out of the garage. Overall, I think this is a great new piece of hardware. Aqara has solved a lot of difficult problems to get a lock in this form factor. Now, assuming that Aqara can settle some of this auto locking thing that I have with a software update in the future, or maybe if that's not a problem for you and you actually want the auto locking, then either way, I think this is a great choice for a new lock in your home. And there'll be links in the description if you want to check it out, as well as another video from my channel here that YouTube thinks you'll be interested in. Thanks again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.